Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise also to speak on this bill before the Senate. We have a situation here. I want to take up some of the points made by one of the previous speakers who talks in the context of not wanting... sorry. Mr Deputy Chair, am I entitled to speak?
Indeed you are.
Yeah, thank you.
Order on my left.
So I want to pick up on a point made by one of the previous speakers in relation to the indebtedness for young students who go ahead and pursue higher education. Well, of course, there is a fundamental solution to that problem, and that is not to incur the debt in the first instance. This is true of almost everything in life. It's always amused me when reference is made to free healthcare and free education, when in effect these are the two things that are by far and away the most expensive support and services that we give as a government to those of our nation. The case has been well made that people who invest my money, it's a point that's lost on many, invest my money in acquiring their education. This is money that I have worked and paid my part to the receipts of this nation, which is lent to these students so as they can advance themselves in life. I have no problem with that. I understand the value of education. I understand ensuring that we have arrangements in place that creates an educational opportunity for everybody. And if that requires, in the circumstances of a student, if that requires them borrowing some of my money and the money of other taxpayers in the nation to invest in their education, then that has my total support. But I'm afraid that I don't have much sympathy for the argument that an investment that I loan to somebody so as they can advance their circumstances in life is a bad investment. So I think that aspect of these to do with these changes is quite appropriate. You know, this package has an expanding and demand-driven Commonwealth funding system for students studying for higher education diplomas, advanced diplomas and associate degrees, costing some $370 million over 3 years. I hark back to my own era. I recall when I graduated in a class of 36 students that only 2 went on to higher education. That opportunity wasn't there in my age. It wasn't an option for families who couldn't, in my case, perhaps, might I say, couldn't afford the cost of higher education, the cost of living away from home that was associated with it in those days before the expansion and regionalisation with universities. And so, for a government to continue to invest in the opportunities for these young men and women, I think is a terrific thing, and it's of great disappointment that we need to get caught up in this selfish attitude that somehow they have to pay off a debt that has given them one of the greatest gifts in life. The figures are out there. I don't necessarily have them in front of me, but the figures are out there that demonstrate that their earning opportunities, their earning capacity goes up 3- and 4-fold. So the investment may prove to be one of the soundest investments that they make in their lifetime also. The reform package extends Commonwealth funding to all Australian higher education students in non-university higher education institutions studying bachelor courses, costing $449 million over 3 years. So there's combined investments heading towards $1 billion in education, in expanding the opportunities for education for the young people of our nation, and indeed I imagine whilst not being an expert on the legislation, that this extends to all applicants for higher education, be them young students graduating from school or those more mature students who endeavour to enjoy some of the benefits of tertiary development also. Mr Acting Deputy President, over 80,000 students each year will be provided additional support by 2018. This includes an estimated 48,000 students in diploma, advanced diploma and associate degree courses, and 35,000 additional students undertaking bachelor courses. Now there's a number worth repeating. 35,000 additional students, 35,000 young Australians who might not otherwise have had the opportunity without some of the reforms that have been presented in this higher education reform package. The legislation provides for more opportunities for students from low socio-economic status backgrounds through new Commonwealth scholarships, broadening out the scholarship program with the greatest scholarship scheme in Australia's history. This, in effect, means free education for the brightest students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, can I say, oftentimes our colleagues from across the hallway here hold themselves out to have some sort of a mortgage over those in our communities who come from lower socio-economic circumstances. I know some of these young people. I know their families. I know their circumstances. I employ people who come from or did employ people who come from lower socio-economic circumstances, and I intend to support any form of legislation through this place that increases the prospects for those young men and women, and indeed it extends to mature students in this space also. People who can better themselves in life, and that's why I believe this piece of legislation is a very well thought through piece of legislation. I was disappointed to hear Senator Lazarus earlier make reference to the fact that there hadn't been sufficient consultation. That's been somewhat in conflict with some of the social media comments that the Senator has made earlier today, criticising Christopher Pyne, the Minister responsible for this package, in part, from endeavouring to make contact with him. So these are the sorts of things, and I want to attach my remarks to those of Senator Madigan, a statesman. In fact, I say on the record, your words today were very, very measured. They are very applicable to these particular circumstances. This is as important a piece of legislation to come before this chamber in recent months. Everyone's in agreement that there's been a deterioration in circumstances in how the Senate is conducting itself. There are, I understand, conventions that have been long held in this place that have been abused in recent times with the gagging of debate. And there cannot be, from my point of view, a more important piece of legislation equal to that legislation we've had to deal with the nation's security than this higher education reform package. Again, it's worth emphasising the point that there's going to be an additional 35,000 students, many of them from the lower socio-economic backgrounds, who will have opportunities that will be dashed here today if this bill doesn't be given the opportunity for proper debate, for the time, as Senator Madigan alluded to allow the ideas to mature, for everybody to listen to everyone else's contribution. There may, my pay scale is too low to understand whether Minister Pyne has a capacity to move and shift on some of these issues, but I'm sure that he continues to be open, with a very open mind, to discussions to be able to resolve any of the difficulties that members of this Senate have. Another part of the bill is freeing universities to set their own fees and compete for students. Well, there's a novel idea. There's a novel idea. All of us operate in market arrangements away from this place, or have done for those of us who've had some experience in business. And oftentimes the ability for a business, and the provision of education is a business, probably the most important business up there with provision of health services and security for our nation. What a novel idea that we might allow universities to be able to set fees and to create an environment where they pursue a particular market share. I promise you they will respond to demand. You can't survive in a free market environment unless you respond to the demands and keep yourself price attractive. And so this sort of competition, I think, will have the intended course to really give that a lift. Competition will definitely enhance quality and make higher education providers more responsible to the needs of the students and the labour market. When universities and colleges compete, the students are the winners. These students, these additional 35,000 students on one hand, and many tens of thousands of students from lower socio-economic backgrounds, they will be the winners. Because competition, by its very nature, drives institutions or businesses to the edge to make sure that they provide the most attractive, the most competitive type services, goods or services, in this case services in education, for the lowest possible price. That's how you achieve your market share, and then you have an absolute obligation to maintain the quality in the delivery of those services if you are to retain your market share and grow your business. So I agree with the statement that when universities and colleges compete, the students are the winners, and by extension our communities are the winners, our economy are winners. All of Australia, we all win, and that's why I'm happy, despite the protests by some previous speakers, that's why I'm happy to have my money loaned to students on these most equitable terms, so as they can grow. They can grow. I invest in business. I have a couple of hundred staff before I left my business to come here. I invested tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of dollars in my staff for them to advance and develop their own educational background, because I was rewarded and yielded in increased productivity. And that's exactly, this is no different here. No different here. In my case, they paid me back through their productivity as employees. In this case, these students, most whose names I'll never know, will pay me back as they contributed to the productivity of this nation, and we will all be rewarded as a result. So the argument about the loans, I think, is a moot argument and needs to be set aside. And when you do that, you find that a little bit of the heat comes out of this debate, and you can concentrate on the positive uplift that this particular reform package delivers right across our community, not discriminating at any level. Strengthening the higher education loans program that sees the taxpayers' support on all students' tuition fees up front and ensures that students only repay their loans once they are earning a decent income of over $50,000 per annum. Now let's just think about that. Not 1 cent needs to be paid up front by the students, not 1 cent, and they don't have to make a repayment until they're earning $50,000 plus. Now, we have circumstances where some might think that $50,000 is not a lot of money. Certainly, some of my colleagues in this place could be forgiven that $50,000 is not a lot of money. But if you're a young person starting out, I promise you, $50,000 is an absolute head and shoulders above what my good wife and I earned when I was 18, 19, 20, 21 or 22, and starting to collect up some copper coins to get a bottle of milk. That's how long ago it was. The milk was still in a bottle. Correct. And I promise you there was no one at my gate wanting to lend me money, not one red razoo so that I could get ahead. And so I would have loved a bit of this stuff around the place going back 30-odd years ago. So the package also removes the fee help and vet fee help loan fees, which are currently imposed on some students undertaking higher education and vocational education training. Now, as I've listened to the contribution of a number of speakers, not one mention of that. You want to talk about money, you want to talk about those that you think are an impost. Not one single speaker raised, and this is so typical of the contributions often made in this space against progressive government legislation. It's almost as if every night, and certainly starting last September, people go to bed, they fit up this machine, it erases the past, it erases the 26 deficits in a row, it erases all the promises of surpluses that would have allowed governments more flexibility in the space of education, in the space of health, in the space... Could you deal with the interjection, please? It really drives me nuts. It's not a practice. It's not a practice I engage in. And I'll tell you what.
Order. Order. Order on my left. Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you for that, Mr. Acting Deputy President. It was very effective. And there's no need to stop the clock with the interjections in my case, because I'm getting towards the end of the page. So, the the higher education reform package also secures Australia's place at the forefront of research. It makes us competitive. They're trying to distract me another way now, Mr. Acting President, so I should face you rather than get your wrath. With an investment of $150 million in 2015-16 for the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure. Now just think about that. That's $150 million in 15-16 for the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure. What a wonderful boost that will be to allow that to be able to progress and make its contribution to these reforms. There's $139.5 million to deliver 100 new NEW 4-year research positions per year under the Future Fellowship Scheme. Now, what a wonderful progressive measure that is under the reforms. 100 of them, all brand spanking new, polished up 4-year research positions. Only the good Lord would know what will come out of that sort of investment, but you can be assured, even if we only get a productivity yield of 25%, imagine the impetus that it'll give to our nation, and in doing that to our economy. And these students who were yesterday on $50,000 a year will be on $60,000 a year, and their repayments will be free as a result of the investment in the first instance, which is often a test that we apply in business before we make the commitment in the first place. There's $42 million to support new research in tropical disease, of great interest to my colleagues and I, from the great state of Queensland, where the tropical disease sometimes affects us. We've had little inflictions during the Queensland inquiry recently, where obviously the pollen from the mango trees had got to colleagues while we were trying to examine the witnesses. But so $42 million to support new research in this tropical disease will be well received and supported by the good folk of Queensland who do their share and someone else's in supporting the receipts of this nation, so that we have sufficient money to lend to these absolutely privileged young men and women, bright young men and women, my nephews and nieces, all those, my staff's children. What a wonderful opportunity this is. I'm having difficulty getting through this without being, well, I am, but there's there are so many important things to bring to your attention, because clearly, by the contribution that's been made from the other side, you weren't aware of some of these things. Otherwise, there's no way in the world you would resist this legislation, as we've seen from some on the crossbench. So then, finally, may I close on the centrepiece, which is a $24 million contribution to the Antarctic Gateway Partnership, because, as you know, I believe that white beetles should be sent to the Antarctic. I said so a fortnight ago, and this sort of investment will make that so much easier for our nation. So it really is a double benefit. we get rid of the wife beaters, and we also support the Antarctic Gateway Partnership. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, it's been a great privilege with very short notice to allow me to be able to make a contribution here today, and I hope it's had some impact on colleagues.
Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan.